Welcome everyone to our theme for conversation from our Learning and Earning report on the fallout from the automation of entry-level jobs and what this all means for young people, employers, and the future of economic mobility. As we know, AI isn't just changing what we do at work, it's also restructuring how people enter the workforce in the first place. And the early career roles that have traditionally been the training ground for future experts are the most exposed to automation. Today, we're incredibly lucky to have two people who've been shaping this conversation. Matt Sigelman, who's the president of Burning Glass Institute and the co-author of some of the most important labor market research of the last decade, and Allison Salisbury, the founder and CEO of the Humanist Ventures Studio, and one of the sharpest thinkers about the future of education, workforce, and opportunity. So I'd love to invite them both on, as well as my colleague, Jen Lee, who co-authored the Learning and Earning report, as we discuss all of this. There's a lot to discuss on the topic, and it feels like it's one of the hottest themes right now. But to set the stage, I kind of wanted to begin with a question that a lot of people are having anxiety about, and that's specifically around what's changing. You all are studying the data, you're talking to employers, educators, young people. What are you seeing as the strongest signals that the ground is shifting under today's early career workers? And a question for both of you.
I'll be glad to just start off with just some facts. For those who know me, I'm a data guy, and I can't speak without giving a bunch of statistics, but maybe those might be helpful in framing the conversation. So look, you're absolutely right to be focusing us on this ground shift that we're seeing. We're seeing increasing signs that the playing field is shifting for college grads, and that these may be structural changes, right? We're all hearing about layoffs that are going on. We're all hearing about how there's fewer job opportunities than there have been in the past. But it's easy to say, hey, look, we've seen this script before. There's always cycles. There's now maybe a down cycle. That's actually a little bit different from what we're seeing. So first of all, just in terms of just diagnostics, right? Unemployment for young male college grads is now 7%. So that's actually higher than in the aftermath of the Great Recession. We're also seeing that unemployment for college graduates is now equal to that of those who don't have college, which is really a first. We're seeing that layoffs are disproportionately affecting young workers. Actually, usually what you see in a down cycle is that companies are trying to shed costs, right? So they tend to go after the most expensive workers, i.e. those who have more experience. And here we're seeing the opposite. And we're also seeing key knowledge economy sectors, the ones that have tended to offer the most opportunity for young grads, are shifting their hiring preferences very distinctly away from hiring at the entry level and toward hiring experienced workers. So, what's going on? First, we're seeing the really kind of the first step change improvements in productivity that we've seen in decades. For decades, productivity growth has been stalled. Companies grow, but they hire workers as they grow. This is the first time that we're seeing growth happen without adding jobs. We're also seeing the effects of a post-pandemic labor shortage that forced a reckoning. Employers now see employees as a liability, and they're moving to a high output, low employment model. And then, of course, there's AI.
Yeah, my perspective is I go a little bit more to the ground truth of what's actually happening in these jobs. And so I think about jobs in large-scaled Fortune 1000 companies, and then I also think about the net new jobs being created within startups. So I'll start with the first and then I'm with the second. In large Fortune 1000 companies, if you look at entry-level work, for the most part, it's repetitive, it's rule-based, and it's digitally mediated. And those are the three types of things that AI is particularly good at. And so if you look at entry-level roles, whether it's back office or call centers or healthcare billing, places where we just have massive number of people, especially women, employed today, I think what you're already seeing is those jobs are starting to, they're not backfilling people who are leaving, they're not opening net new roles, and in some cases they're doing downsizing en masse. I think the interesting point here to note is you're probably not going to see those jobs completely go away. You're just going to see them be reduced in number pretty dramatically, because right now, at least, the AI capabilities are quite good at tasks in these jobs, but quite bad at bundling those tasks into actually executing a consistent stream of work. It's also not particularly good at continuously learning the way an employee can actually continuously learn on a job. And so you're still going to have people in these roles. You're likely just going to have fewer of them. And over the period of, let's say, a 5 to 8 year period of time, potentially you see the roles go away entirely. The second thing I really like to look at, though, and one of the places that I think is really the canary in the coal mine of where this is all going, is companies that are being started today and can build teams in an AI native way from day one. So these are, young startups coming out of places like San Francisco and New York and other places where they're building their teams from scratch. A few things that we're seeing. One, you're seeing revenue per employee go way up, which means you're getting a lot more productivity with a lot fewer people. And actually the badge of honor as an entrepreneur 5 years ago was how many people work for you. And today it's what is your revenue per employee? So you even see sort of culturally in the narrative are seeing these big shifts. The second thing you're seeing is the collapsing of functions. Whereas I would say 5 to 8 years ago in startups and growth entrepreneurship, you would really prize specialization and deep expertise. Now you're seeing a shift back to generalists. You're seeing people, instead of hiring a product designer, a product manager, and an engineer, collapsing that into one function. And I think that's a really interesting trend when we imagine the future of work, especially the entry-level role, because as AI gives specialization and intelligence on tap, what is the human's role in that is around orchestrating those specialized agents to accomplish a task. And so I think these give us sort of a barbell insight around the future of our labor market and give us cues around sort of what skills, capabilities, mindsets, values are going to be useful for young people in the future.
I want to just pick up on something that Allison just said. I think is really important here, and it sort of actually gets to the nub of how AI reshapes the way we think about productivity. On the one hand, I think a lot of what people are anticipating is, hey, we're going to automate a bunch of stuff away, some of the first sets of things that Allison was just describing, and that's how we're going to get to new productivity by using fewer workers. And it's actually very much an industrial era view of what drives productivity, right? So just to get, again, all data nerdy here, I warned everybody at the start, right? Productivity is a ratio. It's the value of the work that's created against the cost of that work. And here's why I want to go there, because when we think about productivity, we have this kind of Taylor, this Taylorism kind of view of people with stopwatches and clipboards, and that image is of using less labor, of making labor more commoditized, of cost less, of trading it offshore, of automating it away. And AI certainly has some potential to do all of those things that we've seen in the past. It also has the potential to reshape the numerator, to make people's work worth more. And that's going to come down to making sure that we have a stronger basket of skills, make sure that we have a workforce that is capable of taking on more work and taking on more complex work and of higher value work. And so that's sort of the paradox, because on the one hand, a lot of the efficiencies that companies are running at right now are classic, let's automate the thing away kind of efficiencies. Ultimately, AI helps us do more things to scale ourselves across broader problems and to become worth more.
Allison and Matt, you guys are presenting a very potentially daunting future, right? For like an early stage grad, you have to have a stronger basket of skills that are higher value across multiple different functions, right? Like that's a lot more than we probably have asked of our recent entry level workers and graduates in the last decade plus. Like, how do you think about how new workers should prepare for being able to do this higher level work across different functions in many different, with many different skills?
So I'll start again. Allison, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I think first of all, Jen, to your point, this is going to be really hard, and it's going to be hard precisely because an education system that already struggles to make effective connection between school and work is going to have to do what it's not doing today very well that much better. Right, we're going to need to train students to start their careers not at the beginning but in the middle, to be able to do at 22 what you used to kind of get to by the time you were 27 or 30. So what it says is that we have to be able to graduate students, whether they're going straight from high school to work or whether they're going to college first. We need to graduate students who have more skill and greater proficiency of the skills that they're being taught at today. That means that we've got to, among other things, face a hard reckoning of what we aren't doing well today, because it's easy to pat ourselves in the back and say, hey, look, the future demands human skills. That's what's at the sort of the bedrock of the American liberal arts heritage. It is. But are we actually doing it well enough? So that's the first thing I'd say on this. I think a lot of this comes down to also recognizing that we've got to really rethink not just how AI gets used in education, but what it is that we're teaching. What are the changes that need to be made into curriculum? And most conversations today are on the how, right? How do we personalize learning? How do we keep kids from cheating? We recently have been looking at, we did an analysis of the curricula of 21 states and distilled them down to 140 different learning objectives. What we found and this summarizes the challenge or reflects the challenge, Jen, that you just brought up. What we found is that none of them goes away. What we found, though, is that many of them need to be taught in new ways. There are, take the example of research skills, right, and of sort of the ability to undertake research. We found that the ability to create a research plan and to retrieve information, right, probably spend a little bit less time on those things. AI is pretty good at those. On the other hand, the ability to validate the kind of things that you're retrieving, the ability to synthesize and to be able to leverage the new fact base, that becomes actually those all become more important skills going forward, right? So it means that we have to rethink in each part of our curriculum what we're teaching and the way that we're teaching it.
Yeah, building on that, the insight that for me I'm just deeply confident about is that if the last decade and a half we were obsessed with the skills gap, the next decade and a half we're going to be obsessed with the experience gap. And then the skills gap is a subset of the experience gap. I think that you will increasingly see that we are expecting 22-year-olds being required to do the job of 27-year-olds, or they won't get the job and they certainly won't be promoted. And then the question is, whose problem is that and what do we do about it? And so one provocation I would make is, what would it look like for 50% of formal learning within high school and college to be experience-based? And it's both because of this looming experience gap that is only going to get bigger, not smaller, but it's also because we've known for a very long time that learning through doing actually is the most efficacious way to acquire skills. And so there's sort of now two reasons, not just one, that we should shift to this this model of learning.
And just to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Claire.
No, go ahead.
And just to sort of build on that for a second, right? So we know that right now most of the learning that students do is explicit learning. That is to say, it's the kind of thing that you can be taught in a classroom, that you can learn from a textbook. Exactly, Allison's point. Some of the most effective things are implicit learning, the kind of things that you can only get through experience. The problem is, and we also know from our research that just literally the single biggest determinant of career success is whether or not someone's had an opportunity at work-based learning, or more broadly at experiential learning. We know that having even a single internship cuts in half the likelihood that a college graduate will wind up underemployed. We know that the single biggest factor in shaping why schools either overperform or underperform has to do with the share of their students who have a work-based learning experience. But this also gets the challenge, right? If we're saying that entry-level work opportunities are going away in many fields, and by the way, I put a big asterisk on that, which we can maybe come back to. But if we're saying that entry-level opportunities are going away in many fields, how do we create work-based learning experiences? How do we make sure that there's enough on the table there that employers want to engage, that they want to create these sets of experiences? And this may be where we're going to need to get a lot more creative. It says that we're going to have to use AI, in fact, to create new simulations. It says that we're also going to need to make sure that we're explicitly developing into our curricula the kind of learning that will help prepare students to be more effective, even when they start an internship. And it also means that we're going to need to integrate this more directly. Right now, if we're lucky, a school will say, okay, great, we're going to help you get an internship. But the internship is still outside of what you're doing curricularly. The extent to which we can say, hey, look, we're actually bringing in faculty to supervise. We're going to make the things that you're learning intrinsically be part of an extrinsic curriculum. I think those are going to be some of the kinds of things that will ensure that we can scale the opportunity to have a meaningful work-based learning experience to more students.
Yeah, I love that you bring up this tension around implicit and explicit learning, and it feels like the implicit learning part, at least for us, for a very long time, it's been very hard to measure that. Obviously, you mentioned AI-based simulations. That might be a better way to track that development of skill. But I'm curious, as you think about just both on the college or education institution front, the ones delivering these AI-first work-based learning experiences, as well as on the corporate front, the ones who are measuring this currency of implicit job readiness or experience. How are you seeing them measure success here, and how are you seeing them measure this skill, and how is it different from the last decade?
Matt, would you like to keep going with that?
Sure. I felt like, gee, I keep stepping in, so glad to keep doing it. But Allison, I think you're going to bring so much expertise on this question. But I think, look, what I would say is this, exactly to your point. Right now, we've been operating under a currency of degrees, and we've been approaching as employers the question of readiness through proxies. We're saying, well, gee, I can't evaluate whether somebody has these capabilities, so I'm just going to trust the fact that they have a degree, or they have a degree from a given institution. And I think this is where there's a lot of opportunity today to go beyond this. On the one hand, college degrees are valuable. I think reports of the death of the college degree are greatly exaggerated. They've been a singular force for upward economic mobility, and there's no reason to believe that necessarily changes. But I think it is going to be a lot easier for employers to be able to vet things more directly, whether that's through the same kinds of simulations that can give people experience, or ways that employers can, at greater scale, evaluate what people know, whether it's through pairing degrees with credentials, or using a set of credentials that could potentially provide alternatives. We've been creating a set of frameworks and a data set, which we call our credential value index, to be able to empirically evaluate 23,000 different workforce credentials. People say which ones actually work, not based on what inputs go in, but based on what actually happens to people who earn them. Those same kinds of trust mechanisms enable employers to have a lot more faith that, hey, this is a credential that somebody has that shows they've got a skill, that shows they're ready for the job, and it actually has proven out.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is finally a shift in hiring practices from what you know to what you know how to do, and more tools in the talent acquisition stack to actually measure what you know how to do through simulation and project-based application forms. And then the thing that I think many of us have been saying for many years now becomes more true, not less true, as jobs become more competitive is how much it matters who you know and who can vouch for what you know how to do. That social capital piece, I think, holds even more expanded sort of impact and importance when they are evaluating at the end of the day, sometimes dozens, if not hundreds of people for just a small few handful of roles.
Allison, I'd love to dig into that a little bit further, because I think that's an area that we've heard a lot of concern around, right? Which is we've worked so hard to be able to start valuing people based off of skills and what they're, beyond kind of like your personal network and the network of, let's say, your family, which is just pure luck, who you end up with from a family perspective. How do you think about that's an important signal in a really, really noisy marketplace? Do you just foresee people leaning into it further? Is there a way for us to think about being able to expand network for those who might not be born into the, really broad, vast, deep, influential networks to begin with?
Yeah, I hope so. And, some of my favorite work on this is Julia out of the Clay Christensen Institute. And she's done a lot of work around pro-social technologies and how it can help learners and workers not just build the network, but build the skills and confidence to build the network. Another sort of example of an entrepreneur here is it's Nitsan with Climb Higher. And a lot of what she's done is package her research into Goldie, an AI companion, and works with low opportunity workers in particular to help them build the skills and confidence to build their network. It's called Goldie because it's how do you make the Goldilocks ask? It's not too big, it's not too small, it's just right in terms of that person you want to be introduced to because they work at the company that you're applying for a job at. It's a lot of the social capital and social networking skills people from privileged backgrounds learn through osmosis, and thinking about how do we actually help build the skills and confidence for everyone to be able to go and leverage, build and leverage their network for opportunity. Because I don't see that going away. It is a very human way to think about hiring. We all do it, even if we try not to. And so really, I think what's about is how do you help more learners? How do you help more workers build the skills and confidence to go build their network? I think even within a traditional post-secondary environment, we see a lot of excitement. I'm quite excited actually around how AI can help us really improve the entire student experience end to end, from where they should go to college, to what they should learn, to what their financial aid package is, to what their academic experience should be, to what their career experience should be. And AI, I think, increasingly can support that entire student experience end to end. And then the question becomes, okay, but what about the relationships that students would have otherwise built on campus with advisors and faculty and peers that where they used to previously go to for help? And I think this is an example of sort of what's going to happen across the entire education stack as AI becomes really good at helping learners navigate information, figure out their next best step, make decisions about what they should learn and how they can apply it and what career they should pursue. Where then do we use relationships in that experience? If the triage experience is being supported by AI, we can start to use relationships in learners' lives to help them do things like navigate a local community, make connections to mentors, figure out what internship might matter for them. And so I really hope that becomes the evolution of how we think about those frontline advisors and support staff within educational environments at all stages. We can start to repurpose their time and their energies for those higher order connections on behalf of learners.
The opportunities to leverage AI to empower learners to develop networking skills and to build out the kind of social capital in the ways that Allison just described are very exciting and very powerful. I also think that there's some lessons here for companies in terms of how they make sure that they're not falling back on the same kind of levers that have always dominated in hiring, and to continue to, and perhaps kind of dig deeper on social capital and social networks as a way of filling jobs. I think companies get the problem here. I think companies get that both from an equity perspective, as well as from from just a talent shortage perspective, why social networks aren't necessarily giving them the talent that they need, and why they may be tripping on their own shoelaces. But I think it's worth drawing a lesson from both the challenges and successes of the skills-based hiring movement, which I would say at top line level has been pretty unsuccessful. But some of the successes that we are seeing are notable and replicable. And that's why I think it's worth looking at both sides. So first, when I say that it's on the large not been successful, I'll put some data behind that. Right? What we found is that even as there's been a fourfold increase in the number of jobs that have removed college degree requirements, the number of incremental hires who are made once a job drops a degree, not even 4 in 100 additional hires are made who don't have a degree already. So right, what we're seeing is that companies are changing what they say. They aren't actually changing their hiring pattern. That's the net. But when you dig deeper, what you find is that while most companies who drop a degree requirement are either not changing their pattern, or they kind of experience this rebound, if you will, where they have some initial gains and change in pattern, and then quickly everyone's attention gets distracted and they go back, and usually worse than they were doing before. There's about a third of companies who make really significant progress. And by really significant, I mean like a 15-point change in the percentage of people they hire without a degree, and where that actually sticks. And the difference is this: it really comes down to how you translate policy to practice. There's some people who look at the lack of success in skills-based hiring, and they'll say, well, this was all just kind of lip service. It was just a thing that sounded nice. And actually, I take companies at their word. I think that for the most part, this was well-intentioned. The CEO believed in it, but to the hiring manager, it felt risky. Nobody got fired for buying IBM, as the famous quip goes, and nobody got fired for hiring the kid with the Harvard degree. And I think in companies that are proving successful, what they're doing is they're actually changing the fundamental hiring process. They're moving from it being mostly about behavioral interviews to actually creating work samples, to evaluating them in an anonymous way. They're actually upfront defining when we say a college degree or other experience, to saying, well, what is the experience that we would consider as good? So there's a bunch of things that we're seeing successful companies do. And I think when we can start to replicate that at scale, we can make sure that on the one hand, students are gaining new access to social capital and are learning how to build their networks. But on the other hand, companies are becoming less reliant on it.
I want to double down on just the company perspective here, because they're obviously they've been navigating the skills-based hiring movement, and to some success, to some challenges, and it feels like for your CHRO, your CLO, your CEO of a company, they're navigating a lot of noise and space. I think today there was something around Meta tracking AI usage of their employees and measuring their ability to use AI. There's various our recommendations for AI apprenticeships. As you think about all the employers that, maybe I'll start with you, Matt, that you all are engaging with, what do you feel like are actionable ways that they can redesign or shift immediately? It sounds like hiring practices is a good place to start. I would love some kind of practical advice for those in the audience that are listening.
So a couple things that I think companies need to start with. One, and Claire used an important word, which is redesign. Right? We have to actually get very specific about how do we redesign roles. And to do that, we actually have to start with use cases. We're treating AI right now as a broad technology, and from a capability set, it is. But what will determine a company's success or failure is going to be how forward we are about defining a set of use cases where we're going to lead in. Companies don't have a shortage of good ideas for leveraging AI, but they often struggle to figure out which ones to prioritize. And often it's so decentralized that replicating the successes isn't done, and meanwhile there isn't the resource that's being run and the focus and attention that ensures which use cases wind up being successful. So if we start off and say, where are we going as a company? What are our key strategies? What are the KPIs that we're measuring ourselves against? And then say, where can AI really move the needle most? Then what we can do is understand what are the workforce impacts? What are the talent sets that are going to need to be involved? How will their work change? And then what we can do is actually get back and deep into the role architecture itself. Right now, we know employees are using AI, but very few companies have systematized it. And so what that means is that all the efficiencies that are being gained, for the most part, are accruing to the individual worker and not to the firm, right? Okay, great. I'm going to start using ChatGPT to write that marketing copy that I'm responsible for. Okay, well, I was able to do that faster, and I'm able to, potentially get home a little bit earlier. But I think companies need to actually start to say, okay, how are we going to unpack? What are the tasks of every job? Where do we want people using generative AI today, and in what ways, and what are the efficiencies that we think can be gained? That's going to be key both to unlocking digital labor savings, which a lot of companies are keen to accomplish but are struggling to get. But it's also going to be key to helping workers figure out how to rebalance their time. And it's much more that rebalance than it is about cutting heads. What we're finding in just looking at the labor market evidence today, we're finding that actually one of the most significant things we've seen is that the jobs that are seeing the most automation at a task level are the ones that are also seeing the most augmentation. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so when you start taking tasks away, other things which are higher value start to fill it up. But that only happens when we get to be explicit about how we design roles.
Yeah. If we're talking about AI's use in the workplace and just sort of generally what trends are playing out there, something I think we're seeing kind of the dawn of sort of a new era of change management on how workers go about acquiring skills and learning AI. Historically, especially in larger companies, it would be, where is our strategy going? How should our org structure support it? And then what skills do people within each part of this org structure have? What skills do they have today? And what's the gap that needs to be filled? Okay, that's our learning plan. And it's not always done that perfectly, but that is the aspiration of how it's done. It's very top down. And then that whole process happens again a year or 3 years later, and like the next strategy is rolled out. I think what's broken about that is the pace of AI capability changes on a quarterly, not annual basis. And it is, so by the time you roll something top down, it's already out of date. And so the companies that are winning are actually companies like Shopify, who are letting 1,000 flowers bloom, but not stopping there, actually holding a very high bar for expectations around how employees are using AI to become 2 or 3x more productive in their work. Before a manager is allowed to open a net new headcount on their team, they have to prove why that work can't be done by AI, and then only then they get the headcount. Performance reviews include how are you proactively using AI to not just make your work more efficient, but fundamentally be able to do things you couldn't do before. And so they're actually, the top-down culture is creating bottom-up innovation around how AI is being used to automate work. That's kind of wave one of best practice. Wave two of best practice, companies that have been doing that, like Shopify, for the last year or so, what they're starting to see is actually a fundamental rethink in org structures. And I think this is important for the conversation of future and learning and future of work. And it's org structures that actually collapse historical silos, because silos existed for specialization. And now that specialization is not as central, you actually have bigger spans of control for fewer people. And then they access specialization through AI. And so in the beginning of this conversation, I talked about sort of how design and product management and engineering you're seeing a collapse of those functions within startups. I think the companies that are farther along in this journey are seeing similar things. And that is a good thing for work. Organizational designers have been trying to give us bigger spans of control and work, with managers with many more reports and much more ownership and accountability on outcomes, not just work streams, for a very long time. So these are good organizational design practices regardless. AI is now just giving us the leverage and tool to do that as part of our day-to-day work. And so companies and organizations that win here, I think, are on the journey that Shopify and others have been on, this bottoms-up empowerment. And then it leads to some top-down organizational redesign decisions that they're now able to make, because they've built a workforce that really is thinking creatively about how to use this technology to automate and augment their work.
Yeah.
By the way, I think this is part of, oh, sorry, go ahead, Claire.
Oh, no, go for it.
I think this is also, by the way, part of, this brings us back to the question of how do we prepare students for the workforce, right? Because what it says, everything that Allison just described, says that we're all going to have broader spans of control. We're going to need to be ready to do more, not just to do more as in we're going to speed up the treadmill and Lucille Ball is going to be grabbing more chocolates into her pockets or whatever. We've all seen the clip. But it's going to also be about what are the capabilities that what's the broader span of control that we're each empowered to take on. This is why when you hear people tell you that you're not going to need to know how to code anymore because generative AI generates good code, you're not going to need to know how to write anymore because generative AI writes for you, list goes on. All of it is just plain wrong. What generative AI does is it means that all of us are going to need to do those things. It democratizes those capabilities. I know in my own work, I'm creating little desktop applications. I'm kind of creating dashboards, all these kinds of things that normally I would have needed to turn to colleagues to help do. I'm able to do myself. So that means that it's not that we can stop teaching those things. We need to teach a broader set of capabilities. Overall, what we found is that there is a set of skills that when you look at kind of the interplay of automation and augmentation, where AI does both, it actually makes people be both more efficient and more effective at the same time. And those are going to be the new power skills of the 21st century, the sets of skills that make us both more efficient and more effective. These are everything from data analysis skills to writing skills to risk management skills and an array of others. So some of them soft skills, many of them a little bit more applied, but all of them things that most of us are going to need to know how to do, and that bring out that which is most human in our capability sets.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up this idea that I felt it. The floor rises, and I feel like, as someone who has never been able to code something before, just that power that you feel, and it almost feels like there, as much as we talked a lot about doom and gloom, there is a little bit of a potential silver lining for young people that, despite the disruption, there are roles that we don't know about yet. We will see augmentation in the fields that they're prepared or they would like to enter. And it's not just the narrative around AI is taking all jobs. I guess in the last 6 or so or 5 minutes, we do have a lot of audience questions. And so I wanted to make sure we got to those. This one's not necessarily workforce specific, but I'm interested in everyone's vision for what school will be like in 10 years, from what time kids go, who's teaching them, and how they are learning. And we can go as sci-fi as you'd like with this one. Maybe Allison?
Yeah, so I think school 10 years from now, I mean, it depends on what level you're talking about. I think for truly the little ones, it's relatively similar, but a lot more play-based. Actually, if I were just to take a step back, I've been having a lot of conversations on the future of school and schooling recently with people in light of AI. And fundamentally, what I keep returning to is this confidence in things we've known to be true for a long time, right? School should be play-based. It should help kids cultivate purpose and a sense of who they are and how they operate in a community of peers. And it should help them be able to cultivate the agency to identify problems they care about, the skill set to figure out how to structure a hypothesis or a project, and then to actually like manage their learning journey and their output accordingly in an age-appropriate way. Like all of these things that we've always wanted school to be, I actually think what we're seeing now is this tidal wave of urgency for school to become that. Because if it's not that, if it remains this sort of knowledge acquisition machine, it's irrelevant, totally irrelevant. In a world where cognitive intelligence is on tap across every sector and every job, it is the least interesting thing about us that we know things, period. And so if our entire schooling sort of apparatus is optimized to help us know things, it will very quickly become out of date. And so what I'm so excited about in all these conversations is it's just putting fuel on the fire of the things that we've always known work and that are good for kids at every age, and giving us a reason, like a disruptive force, to actually say what needs to be true for this to actually be centered in the schooling experience.
You know, education institutions like to pit academic learning against career, what they call vocational learning. And I think one of the ways that I see one of the biggest transformations I can imagine is that we're going to see this become a both and. On the one hand, we need to double down on the human skills that are at the core of America's liberal arts heritage. Because those are the skills that become increasingly important as AI is able to take on a lot of what is currently being done in work. But we're also going to need to make sure that school is leaving students ready to start their careers in the middle, and that's going to mean not only gaining greater proficiency at the core human skills, but developing the work skills and the applied skills that come through intrinsic learning being incorporated. The other thing that I think is going to be critical here is making school something that isn't just limited to the first couple of decades of our lives. My friend Mitchell Stevens at Stanford likes to talk about a transition from a school society to a learning society where learning is something that's accessible to all of us. And I think that's going to be an important part of reimagining school for the 21st century.
Yeah. One other thing I'd say, and we haven't touched on this, but it's probably my favorite topic right now, is the thing that's going to be automated last are going to be jobs that I call applied jobs. Jobs that require skill of body and mind, especially in care economy roles where there's going to be an ongoing preference for humans for some period of time. And applied jobs happen to be the category of jobs that we are pretty bad at preparing people for. Very broken career pathways into jobs like healthcare, skilled trades, teaching, high-tech manufacturing, and Main Street entrepreneurship. I mean, just to take Main Street entrepreneurship, 50% of the private workforce owns or works for a small business. And yet we do very little actually at the high school level, at the college level, to think about what it might look like to prepare for someone to be successful in a career like that. Healthcare, deeply broken, huge shortfalls in entry level and mid-level people participating in the labor market, and yet very few solutions being mobilized right now to do anything about it. And so most of this conversation was on knowledge economy work. And I think that's really important, especially if you're talking about post-secondary education, because so much of post-secondary education has been organized to prepare students for knowledge economy jobs. And they've sort of become like the like gold standard of jobs that we prepare people for up and down the educational ladder. But I think the thing that we do, and we don't really know what's going to happen to those jobs. Like we can pontificate, we can like look what has happened, we can guess what might happen. We don't actually know. The thing we do know is we have a huge shortfall of people in applied jobs, and that those jobs are unlikely to be going anywhere, certainly in the next 15 years. And so what might we do to help more young people and also dislocated workers move into more AI durable careers like healthcare, like Main Street entrepreneurship, like skilled trades? So we don't spend as much time talking about that, but I really think that's where the puck is going and a lot of innovation in our sector.
Yeah, I feel like that's an amazing point to end on, because I think a lot of people see this current moment as like, this is all just happening to us and there's not much that we can do to move the needle, but you know, out of the chaos, there's very clear opportunity. And as you all both seem to be very clear on, this is not a story about AI taking all of our jobs. It is one of both automation and augmentation. So thank you both. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Allison, for joining us. This has been tremendously insightful. If you haven't checked out already, Burning Glass put out an amazing report on this topic recently, so you can find that. And then Allison has a Substack. I'm blanking on the exact username, but if you search up her name or Humanist, you will be able to find it. And she puts out consistently amazing pieces, one of which was with Matt recently. So a big thank you to both of our speakers, and excited to keep the conversation going.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you both.